America had, that white America had, in applying those ideals across the board.
You know, some historians often, Dr. Mitchell, point to the fact that the Declaration of Independence, while it might not have recognized black humanity, but for the most part, as a result of the Declaration, that black people were able to gain certain concrete benefits. And I think many people talk about how slavery was abolished in the northern New England states and et cetera. Let's look at it from that perspective, and so that we can say this morning.
Well, it was abolished for economic reasons. But I think also, in the period of time when the Declaration was drawn up, and for at least 2 generations after that, Americans, all Americans, especially white Americans, looked at what it meant to be human. And I think those who were honest, who had personal contact, didn't find any difference in humanity based on color of skin. There was nothing that would indicate any less humanness. And right until the present time, there have been people looking at intelligence testing, size of thickness of brain, questions of diseases. I think for those who pursue a racist view, for those who pursue a view of my dark skin making me less human than those with fair skin, they persist. But I think America itself has never been fooled. In that period of time after the Declaration, many a slave master in New England and throughout the South freed their slaves. They genuinely bought into it. It was only when it came down to a question of my independence, or if you were a slave owner, the economic survival of your family, that the South had to hang solid. In the South, there was nothing but agricultural economy, and the only way to survive in that Southern economic system was the use of slave labor.
How did, Dr. Mitchell, when we look at some of the reactions of slaves to the Declaration, I know that you can point out that during the American Revolutionary War that black people played a very, very important role in the struggle. But now, leading up to the war, between 1776, when the Declaration is issued, and the beginning of the war, what were some of the attitudes that black people had, or African Americans had, in reference to what was going on? I mean, the whole war, the coming of independence and et cetera, certainly didn't...
That's a fascinating intellectual question. Because if you were an African American, and if you were a slave, and if your family had been enslaved for 2 or 3 generations, you weren't American. They felt the same threat that the master class felt, because they were Americans. There was never any case of African Americans plotting to pull any plantation or any region into a British alliance. Now, of course, there were the famous slave rebellions and slave insurrections, but these were simply to gain the same rights that were being discussed. When the slave heard his master talking about inalienable rights and talking about freedom, they also wanted freedom. We wanted freedom. You know, freedom is a wonderful concept. People talk about freedom from worry, freedom of retirement age. The human spirit desires freedom. And I think the human spirit within the African American community longed for it as much as any other group. So during this period of time, there was a heightened desire for freedom. You also see it in what types of steps were taken. Many African Americans tried to gain respect by learning to read. Then later, reading was outlawed because people who can read can communicate. And reading might allow those to overthrow the plantation system by communicating.
Undermine the institution of slavery.
Undermine the institution. Religion. There was a degree that Christianity especially advocates freedom. And many African Americans became religious leaders. At a point in time, it was decided that African Americans couldn't be ministers. So ministers had to be approved by the plantation owner. I guess your question I find provocative, because I'd like to say that the slave, the African American in America during the period of time of the Declaration of Independence, was just infected with those views for freedom and liberty and equality as everyone else. Now, just because there weren't violent actions taken, or because slavery, it doesn't mean that we were not affected. It doesn't mean that I was oblivious to what was going on. It's just like today. If you talk about prior to the Super Bowl, everyone in America gets hyped for the Super Bowl. If you're living in the North and the South, if you're having a big Super Bowl party or a small Super Bowl party, everybody's infected. If liberty, if all of the discussions of philosophies of freedom and right and equality, if England England was the bad guy, then the African American community was just as caught up, and the King of England was just as bad.
In other words, Jefferson, when he penned the words